Welcome to Joyful Sober. I'm Alison Lassick, and this is a series of conversations with creative and inspiring people who think the topic of giving alcohol less time or energy is worth having a bit of a chat about. So, in this episode, I'm talking to Albie Colvin, graphic designer and founder of Colour Them Safe, a Melbourne based arts organisation who are really passionate about mental health. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea, and community. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend that to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people listening into our chat. So, it's great to have Albie on the podcast. Through Colour Them Safe, he's creating a welcoming and supportive environment where young people can come together to connect and to explore their creativity through art making in a safe environment. And the organisation's aim is to improve social and emotional well-being of young people, particularly those experiencing disadvantage. And I've known Albie for many years. Our paths first crossed back when we were at Monash University, and he lived on campus with my sister Nat. But it's been quite a while, and I'm sure we've got heaps to catch up on. How are you, Albie?
Yeah, good. It feels like a lifetime ago, like university now.
Oh, yeah, it is.
It kind of is, literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't have to go back that far with any stories. It's really awesome to have you on Joyful Sober, Albie. I'm really keen and excited to chat to you about your journey from graphic design through sobriety and to where you are today. So, are you happy if we kick off the chat with that kind of sober story? Does that sound like a good place to start with you?
Yeah, totally. I kind of knew it was coming. For me, like there was so many factors that I think led to sobriety. It was never one thing, and I think that's the more I learn from other people, that's kind of common. It's not just this one thread. So, like it was health, it was work, it was relationships, it was goals. There were so many kind of overlapping things. But, fundamentally, I wanted more from other areas of my life. And so I wanted to be, a better friend, a better uncle, a better lover. I wanted my business to grow, Colour Them Safe to expand, and I just couldn't be all things to all people, really. As much as I tried my hardest. I think my early 20s were very much like work hard, party harder, and it was totally unsustainable. I think for a while I told myself a story that I was doing okay, and I guess the label I would give it now is I was functioning. And so a good mate of mine around 10 years ago pointed out that I was drinking a lot, and it was kind of then that I started to question. I was like, am I? And I managed to polish off 6 bottles of scotch in 1 week and do a 70-hour work week. And so he kind of lined up my bottles of scotch and was like, do you think this is a problem? And I was like, yeah, it's probably a problem. And so I did Dry July, and that was my entry point. When I trace things back, that was the kind of thing that was dipping my toes in. And, I used that month to kind of gain access to what it would be like not drinking. Following that, ended up doing more dry months. And so, especially around wintertime, where I'm one of those people that gets the SADs in winter, I would just go sober because it was easier to navigate being sober than drinking myself into kind of misery in those shitty months.
Yeah. That's so interesting. You're the first person on the podcast who I've talked to who stopped when after Dry July or one of those kind of things, or use that as the first entry point.
Yeah.
Was it hard your first month? Did you find that a challenging intro? That's probably your hardest bit, right?
Yeah, I found it wasn't too bad. What was hard was getting to the 1st of August and I would write myself off. And so the month was actually great. But what I'd find is I'd get to the end of the month and then just nail myself. And so that went on for 6 or 7 years before I was kind of maybe this isn't a once a month, 1 month a year kind of thing. And so I was doing more and more months up until almost 3 years ago now, where I just woke up one morning and I was like, I'm done. By that time, I kind of wound everything down, and I'd seen, I guess, the benefits for me, in terms of what I was like without the booze. Like, I'd managed to kind of tick off the big things. Like, I'd been to festivals sober, I'd been to weddings sober, went to a funeral sober. That was actually probably the hardest. Not gonna lie. And so, I think once you can get through those big events, I still went through like all the anxiety, and I guess it's to a point I still do question, am I still the fun? Like there's always going to be that thing in the back of my mind where it's like, I love to party, and I still want to be the party boy. I just don't want to run myself into the ground in the process, I guess.
Yeah. I guess doing it more intentionally and
Yeah.
more authentically in a way. Yeah. And
Yeah.
your friend, that's amazing actually, in a way. Like, I feel as though in Australia, everyone's so supportive of each other's drinking. In a way, it's like takes a really good friend probably to say something about it, because everyone still wants their drinking buddy and, for their own alcohol consumption, probably to be able to look to others and say, oh, I'm actually all right. I'm not drinking as much as Albie was. So, hey, things are good. And then just leave it at that. So, it's actually cool to hear you have like probably a mate who really cares about you in that situation.
Yeah, totally. And that wasn't the case with all my mates. Some of them definitely struggled. I actually initially told all my mates that I was just going to take a year off. That was how I kind of sold it to them, because I was really struggling with going out and having the mate just have a beer, bro, have a beer. And I was like, it's just not my thing right now. And so most of them figured out after about 3 to 6 months that I had no intention of drinking again. They kind of knew, they had enough kind of egging me on, being like, just one. And I was like, this is just not my thing anymore.
Yep. Awesome. And so you'd already started Color Them Safe before getting sober, is that right? And I guess got to a point with that where you wanted to take it to the next level. Can you talk to a little bit that part of the journey?
Yeah, so Color Them Safe, I guess, was the living with more purpose. Like, I loved my business, working in the not-for-profit sector as a creative, but it just wasn't kind of fulfilling me in all the ways that I wanted. And so Color Them Safe was all the learning from working with other organizations, and then me going, well, how does my lived experience apply to my own kind of social cause? And so I was really lucky when I was younger to have like mentors and people who helped me in terms of art for well-being. And so I set out to do the same thing. And Color Them Safe, really, the more I've gotten into it, the more I've kind of started healing parts of my younger self, I guess. It's a kind of a beautiful thing. And I would say most of the people in my crew have a similar experience, whereas there's that kind of win-win where it's like we're improving wellness for young people, but at the same time, you're improving your own kind of well-being narrative. And for me, the more I wanted to do for Color Them Safe, the more I realized I couldn't be going on benders on the weekend and then showing up for myself in that way. It was unsustainable, running a business, a charity, and then trying to just be a human being, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty cool. Probably potentially your time off or your moments off made you aware of that fact that it is actually, a different life in terms of energy levels and what you're capable of when you're not having a large number of whiskeys per week.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, that's so cool. And when you were kind of starting to experience those benefits of being sober, what were some of the main things that you noticed, like in the early stages?
In the early stage, it was more kind of like health benefits, like the obvious thing is having more energy and, getting a better kind of routine in terms of exercise. And like similar to you, yoga became much more of a thing. Like I was already doing yoga, and I think yoga kind of helped with my journey a bit in terms of some of the underlying principles. And so, there was kind of like initially the health things, but then I just noticed that I started to actually just treat myself a lot nicer. Like there was like almost like this shift where it was like I started to actually just be the way I treat other people started to be the way I treat myself, which sounds really corny, but I've always been really harsh on myself, and that was one of the biggest kind of tipping points. I started to flex my own personal boundaries and started to actually just go, hey, what does self-care look like for me? And yeah, it's led to some really big things, like my capacity to manage really difficult situations has gone twofold because of that. I'm not putting myself through the ringer as much. Um, Even just my ability to show up for myself and my relationships. I
Mm.
love that I'm the dependable friend. It's a nice label to have.
Yes.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, you can be really proud of that. That's so cool. And it's interesting, isn't it? Like, I felt with the yoga factor that I'd been doing yoga for so long, but maybe it wasn't really having the benefit that I could have gotten out of it until I removed alcohol. Like, I certainly felt a bit better. But when I got sober, it was double. Like, I needed that yoga to be able to relax and to learn how to relax my own body and mind without the alcohol. But then in the same process, removing the alcohol allowed the yoga to have all of these positive mental health benefits that I couldn't have even dreamed of, which is so cool. Yeah, it's
100%. Like exactly the same with me. Like I was already well established with the practice, and I'd kind of done bits of yoga overseas and stuff as well, and I already kind of knew the pieces were there. But yeah, once the kind of alcohol was removed, I think it just allowed other things to fall into place. Like I do yoga every single day now. It's like weird if I don't do it. Like if I miss it in the morning, I tend to come home and do it at night. It's one of those kind of, I guess, my foundations. The same way
mm.
where I was drinking every day, I now, have replaced it in some way with yoga. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't find it that weird in a way. It's almost like we do need something to be able to sort of relax ourselves at the end of the day, or, to be able to get through those challenging situations in a good shape. And it's kind of cool if it's a healthy version of 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 a
Big
tool, I
time.
guess. Yeah.
Our lives are increasingly busy and complex, and I don't think my life will ever not be busy and complex. And so then you have to ask yourself, what am I going to do to navigate busyness and get myself to that level where I am calmer and reflective without kind of tearing yourself inside out in a destructive way. I think that's one of the nice things about yoga, that healthy level of breathing and meditation, but also the values that kind of support it as well.
Mm. Yeah, I really love what you said about, treating yourself the way you would treat others. Like, it seems so simple, but it's actually not. We've got so much negative self-talk in our heads that you're just not even really aware of unless you're like doing some of those kind of mindfulness practices. I mean, maybe some people are, but I certainly wasn't like aware that you
I,
could get
yeah,
that consciousness over thoughts and do something different with them.
big time. Like yeah, it's like it's funny. Like I'd have conversations around being kind to yourself with young people I was working with. Like that was always like front of mind, and it was one of the kind of columns that we were working with. And yeah, the kind of deeper into my sober journey I've got, the more I'm like, hey, hang on, like all of that advice that I'm giving to young people, I need to be taking on board myself. It's been a really big thing. Undeniably my role with Color Them Safe played a big part of my decision to be sober. It was like, who do I want to be? What kind of human
Mm.
do I want to be? Me and one of the board members, whilst in India, were having this conversation around ultimately what do we want for young people? What does a good human look like? And that question played on my mind. I was like, what does a good human look like? And it's not necessarily like a sober human, but I think a human that looks after themselves and actually embodies that whole wellness and self-care practice is much more able then to contribute and look after others, whether it's just their immediate family and friends or whether it's a broader community. I think, yeah, it starts with how you kind of treat yourself. There's that saying as well, like hurt people hurt people. And I think whether we're intentional or not in that, I think if we leave things unchecked, we tend to cause a bit of chaos. I
Yep.
know I'm definitely guilty of that. And so, yeah, I guess I'm only like 3 years in, but I feel like it's just the start of like a really cool journey, I guess.
Yeah, that healing journey as well, I guess. And I mean, everyone, we all have stuff, right? We all come into the world
Yeah.
with plenty of baggage and then accumulate more. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of a cool process to start to deal with some of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of color them safe, can you tell me what it would be like if, for say, a young person who comes in, what that experience is coming in and working with you and your team?
Yeah, cool. And so we ultimately create art for well-being experiences. And so you kind of touched on it at the beginning. We work around kind of three key parts. The first part being connection, and so making someone feels connected and a part of something bigger than themselves. Adopting creativity, and creativity is, I guess, the key in terms of like unlocking the wellness factors. And so whether you're looking at something as simple as mindfulness and being present and grounded in the space, or like the pro-social kind of benefits of things like gratitude, packaging gratitude in art activity can make it seem less like work. Like sitting
Mm.
down and writing three gratitudes can be laborious for the best of us. Packaging it into like an art experience can just be a bit more dynamic and a bit more engaging. But even within the space, using things like reflective prompts around art making to kind of increase communication and a lot of those kind of pro-social behaviors that you'd like to see a young person gain that maybe haven't mastered earlier. And overall, one of the biggest things is actually just showing a young person kindness.
Mm.
Like it's a really basic thing to just show someone, hey, you're a value and you're a good human, regardless of what you've gone through. The moment you engage in our program, it's like, we're going to treat you the same as everyone else and make sure you feel loved and celebrated within our work. Um, and, so making sure that we're as youth led as possible is really big. We're not a class or a school. We are just a community that wants to kind of create a bit of difference for young people, especially those at risk.
Yeah, nice. And so is it kind of organized activities, or do they come in and it's a bit more sort of free and yeah, youth led, I guess, where there's some room for experimentation and coming up with their own exercises?
There's a bit of both, and
Yeah.
so like we're not necessarily an art therapy intervention, but we use a lot of those kind of therapeutic kind of approaches, and so part of it's directive, as in structured, and then part of it's non-directive. The benefit of directive is that you can give a bit of containment and really help a young person feel held if they've got a lot going on. And then the other side of it being non-directive is it really unlocks that curiosity and that kind of creative side of the brain, and also gives the opportunity to go through kind of challenge and struggle, which is a really healthy thing to explore using art. It's something
Mm.
that we can sometimes steer away from challenge, but it's actually kind of healthy to explore that. And what better way to do it with our drop in that's coming up? We always have a kind of variety. And so some of the activities in the drop in will be non directive. It'll be like, here's the materials. Like we like to have a material focus, explore it. And then the other one will be directive. I'm actually going to do a big nest that people can kind of engage with collaboratively. So,
Cool.
yeah.
I love it. I love the idea of like drawing or creating something that expresses your gratitude as well. Like I'm definitely going to do that.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing. Like the
Yeah.
activity, we originally developed that activity in Nepal. And so it's just called the gifts of gratitude. And it's taking the time to think about the things you're grateful for and then creating a physical gift to express it. And so it could be something as simple as a gift card, which most people have got some card to turn into a gift card, or you can get really structural and make something 3D. But yeah, it's like going, well, there's the first thoughts of gratitude, but when you start to think about it in a different form, you really start to kind of go deeper into why it's of value to you. Because most people
Mm.
do pretty quickly three throwaway gratitudes, but when you start to really kind of sit with it and ponder with it, that's when I think you really start to take on board the value that it brings to your life. Um,
Mm.
you know, I think it was like our trip to Nepal in 2015. I got all of our volunteers to do a gratitude journal, and I did one as well. And it's funny, like from the start of the 30 days, mine were quite basic to like about halfway through, they started to get really like existential. Like I just got deeper and deeper. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, because your heart starts opening up on the trip and you're really feeling it more as you go along.
And
Yeah.
like anything, it's a practice, right? And so I think the more you're able to do things, the deeper you go into it. You know,
And when you're sitting and creating something and you're thinking that entire time about what you're grateful for, it's almost becomes like a meditation where you're reflecting on that thing for an extended period versus just quickly pumping out your dot points.
big time. And
Yeah.
like the more sensory and tactile the activity, the more you're going to ground out, right? And so if you're stimulating touch, smell, sounds, like all the senses, you're going to find that people ground out a lot quicker. We had like activity afternoon in Kolkata a couple of years ago with like 36 children of street-based sex workers, and they were all really high energy when we walked in, like literally climbing the walls. I was like, I like a degree of kind of structure to our events. But I had to kind of just surrender to the fact that it was chaos. And so we started out just with like simple like plasticine modeling. I kid you not, within 15 minutes, it was like silence and everyone was just on the ground modeling. It's crazy how just doing something with your hands took this like chaos, like for real chaos, to just calm, And so I guess that's one of the like gifts of kind of art making, and even
Mm.
craft and sport to a degree. It doesn't necessarily need to be art making, but I think sensory engagement, especially, is a really great entry point for meditation. I struggle just sitting. Like if I have to just sit and meditate, I'm pretty hopeless, not gonna lie. But if I do it after my asanas or if I do it after I've done some journaling, it's like a nice way of just easing myself into that kind of state of calm.
If you
I
can get into a bit of flow first somehow, and art's
Yeah,
probably doing that as well. Absolutely.
yeah, big time.
Yeah, amazing. And then if people who are listening want to like get involved or support or like what they're hearing and are curious to investigate further, do you have any thoughts on that?
In terms of investigating art for well-being further,
Yeah, or getting involved with Color Them Safe. Yeah.
yeah, cool. I mean, the most obvious way is to jump online to our website, colorthemsafe.org. We've got a crew application form is the kind of easiest way to kind of get started. It's got some questions around your different skill sets and maybe your time availability. Fill that one out and send it through. That's kind of the best way to go at the moment. Our current offering includes a monthly drop-in. We're back open post kind of Lucky D, which is nice. Where we always kind of start with a meal and then kind of have a variety of activities for young people. And then we also run a 9-week digital program, which is really designed to help young people gain their own independent art making practice. And so we introduce different materials. They get like a kit of supplies. We talk them through different approaches and activities. So by the end of it, they've got like a bit of a toolkit, I guess, an art for wellbeing toolkit that they can use ongoing. And so we're kind of lucky in that respect because being a remote program, it kind of unlocks volunteering for a lot of people that maybe can't physically be in space. And so it's been really good. We're super, super lucky with our crew of volunteers. It's a real blessing, actually. They add so much value to who we are and what we do because the diversity that we have in our crew means that there's more opportunities for diverse young people to connect with us. And so it's really nice to kind of have that spread, especially a lot of our crew have lived experience in mental health, and that's always a really kind of valuable gift to kind of have in the space for empathy creation and connection.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Oh, amazing. That's so cool. And then I'm curious to hear about whether you've got any sort of projects that we haven't talked about coming up or any big things that you're dreaming about for the future, either for yourself or for Color Them Safe.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, for Color Them Safe, we've got some cool things in the pipeline in terms of next year. We're going to look at kind of adding a digital drop-in to our kind of services, so a less formal, so rather than a 9-week program, something a bit more informal, particularly for young people that are isolated or have quite high social anxiety. It's something we've picked up a lot in terms of throughout COVID, but also beyond that. It's like a
Mm.
growing when you look at rural, regional, and remote, access to programs like ours is quite limited when you go out into those areas. And so I think even myself growing up in a small country town, like, that's high front of mind to try and create access points is really big. Personally, I'm pretty keen to get back to India and Nepal next year. That's like my own goal, is like now I've got to aim to kind of save, put money away and get there. I've got some really beautiful relationships in those countries, but also we've been really lucky to learn a lot from our program partners overseas. And so I want to continue that learning, but I also want to show them what we've learned during lockdown and hopefully create some value for them as well.
Oh, yeah, amazing. That's so cool. Like program and cultural exchange
Yeah,
and just to be able to travel again is so amazing for us Aussies who've been pretty locked
I
down.
know. I live for travel. Winter sucks, and so I am like, every time it gets close to the middle of the year, I'm like, where can I go that's warmer?
Yes, I can completely understand that. How exciting. Yeah. And any other sort of final thoughts or tips, I guess, for anyone who might be listening who's just setting off down the sober path? I don't know. I imagine that quite a few of our listeners are potentially in the earlier phases of sobriety, as am I, sort of, when, or at least that was my motivation for starting the podcast, to sort of hear about how everyone else is doing it. And yeah, I guess I'm just curious to hear your sort of biggest thoughts or tips for others.
Yeah, I mean, my first thing would be do what feels right for you. Like your journey is your journey. No one else can decide for you. I think, that's been my biggest takeaway, is I spent so much time comparing myself to other people that it really hindered my own journey. Once I kind of had a bit of conviction around what I wanted, things became a lot easier. And then the second step would be have people in your corner. And so have people that will champion for you and go into bat for you. I got kind of two people that were really close to me that, once I had them on board, it was almost like I had someone to debrief with, but I also had like a social shield when I needed it. It was like a bit of a game changer for me. Um, I think, and a few people on the podcast have mentioned this, but take the time to learn about other people's journeys, even if they seem quite different to you. I think there's always a learning. It's amazing. The first book I read was like My Sober Diary, like this like sober mum of 3, and it like demographically we were very different human beings, but there were so many elements to her book that I really connected with. And so yeah, don't eliminate people's stories because of your physical and your demographic differences. I think there's always going to be learning.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
And my final thing is focus on what you're gaining rather than what you're missing, right? I think it's very easy to be like, oh, I miss this element, or I miss having a like Shiraz or instead focus on like, hey, I've gained this relationship, or I've gained the time to do this. I've gained my energy. I've gained money to travel with. Whatever your thing is, I think it's better to have like a positive focus rather than a deficit focus. I think when you fall into those holes of like longing and missing, you're kind of setting yourself up for fail to a degree. Well, that's been my experience. The days that I found it the hardest have been like the longing for like, oh, I wish I could do this thing, instead of, hey, check out what I've nailed this year because I've been sober.
Yeah, amazing. And good, once you've got some like days under your belt, you can reflect on, all of those awesome achievements and how good it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So many good tips there, Albie. I love it. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Albie. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been so rad listening to the podcast and just like hearing other people's stories. And I think, yeah, increasingly, I think we're at the start of a big tipping point. More and more I talk to young people that don't want to drink, like that's their trajectory at a young age.
Mm.
And yeah, I've got lots of mates that kind of give me a bit of a nudge and be like, hey, like I'm thinking about, drinking less or going sober. How can you kind of help me out? And so I think it's a really cool thing. I don't think, everyone needs to go sober. I think some people can function okay, but I think if you're questioning it, I think listen to that questioning. It's important. It's your body trying to tell you something.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true, actually, that it seems like a lot of young people questioning their relationship with alcohol sort of earlier, and society is almost like allowing a bit more room for that as well. Like, I don't know about you, but growing up in the country and then at uni, it just seemed like it's not really even an option, or like the
Yeah,
idea of not drinking just doesn't even really register on the radar. So it's kind of
absolutely.
cool actually to see it out there more. And yeah, that's been a nice part of making this podcast as well, is just to connect with others and to see that there are other people out there, that's not such a solo road as maybe I might have initially imagined.
Yeah, totally. There's heaps of people. And like, I was amazed when I started to kind of dig at who was sober and who wasn't, to get some kind of role models, I guess. And it kind of blew me away, people that were sober. Like, but even people within my life that I loved and admired, when I mentioned I was going sober, they're like, yeah, I haven't had a drink for 5 years. And I was like, no wonder I love you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No wonder you're doing so much cool stuff
yeah,
with so much energy.
exactly. And so, yeah, it's funny, like sometimes it's right underneath our kind of eyes the entire time. We just haven't kind of asked the question, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, such an interesting point. You're absolutely not looking for that sober person when you're out drinking or whatever. So of course.
Yeah.
Oh, so good. Well, thanks again, Albie. It was so great. I really appreciate your time, and I think this is such a good episode. So yeah, thanks.
Likewise, absolute pleasure.